Welcome to In the Fire, a podcast for the young families of Chapelgate Presbyterian Church. Marriage and parenting are a wonderful blessing and are extremely rewarding, but they're also really hard and can leave us feeling exhausted, overwhelmed, and defeated. That's exactly why we started this podcast, to help families see how the gospel injects encouragement, comfort, and hope into the daily grind of our lives, and to remind you that you're never alone in the struggle. There is another in the fire.
Well, welcome back to In the Fire. My name is Rob Gicking. I'm the host of the show and a pastor here at Chapelgate, and I'm so excited because this morning I'm joined by Laura Starsoneck, who is going to be here to share a little bit about her life and also about her book, Single-Handedly Blessed. And Laura is a member here at Chapelgate and a friend, and I'm very excited to have you here. Laura, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. Well, I am very glad to have you. So before we get into the meat of the conversation, I've been asking everyone on season 3 to share something that they're really into right now and something that they're just like so fed up with, they're just done with. So what is something, Laura, that you are like absolutely in love with in your life and something that you'd be very happy if you never had to look at or see or deal with that thing again?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind that I'm really into right now is playing Uno with my 5-year-old.
Yes.
Competition, because she beats me like most of the time. We are heavily into playing Uno right now. Loving it.
I don't know if you agree with this. I find that there's very little skill involved in Uno, but when I was young, I thought for sure that was like a strategy game. Like for sure I had the skills. When I won, it was because I had played my cards right. And now I'm like, as an adult, I look at this game and I'm like, you get hit with a couple reverses or if you draw twos at the wrong time,
Yep.
You're done.
Yeah, and now they have Uno Flip.
Okay, tell me about
really
that.
cool. So on either side of the card, it has a number and so when you lay down it's a certain card, you have to flip all your cards over. One whole hand took us like about 15 minutes the other day.
So am I understanding correctly? You're saying there's like a red 3 on this side, and then if I flip my card, it could be a green
There's like
7?
a dark. It's like a light. So one side of the cards are light, and the other sides are dark.
Ooh.
And on the dark side, it has
the dark
plus
side.
5. You have to draw 5.
Oh
and
my
it's all kinds of
goodness.
stuff. Anyway, so that's a really fun thing. Every night
Wow.
we play Uno. It's really fun.
Okay.
It's pretty competitive.
Yeah,
Being
sounds
a 5-year-old.
like it. So so you're loving Uno
Yeah.
with your daughter.
Yes.
What are you not loving right now?
What I'm not loving ever, there are olives.
Yeah.
Ever. I want them out of here.
Does it matter the variety or color?
Don't care.
What about olive oil?
And every I do like olive oil.
What about olive the name?
Haven't thought about the name. I always associate it with olives. Yeah,
Like the
every
person
year,
hates
and
your name.
every year, almost every year, I get something related to olives as a gift.
Oh no.
Yeah, so
Because people know.
yeah, they know, and now they really know.
Yes. All right, world, you now know. You want to prank Laura? Get her a nice jar of olives.
Yeah. Ooh.
You know, I'm pretty hit or miss on olives. I'll be honest. Like black olives on a pizza, I can get down with. Olive like martini. You know, like James Bond. Like
Oh yeah.
he always has that olive on a martini. Like I really, when I was younger, I was like, man, James Bond is so cool.
Yeah.
I gotta order one of these. And so I, martini, shaken, not served,
Right.
blah blah blah. And and I was like, this is vile.
Yeah.
Like, oh my goodness, it's disgusting.
Nope. I don't want anything to do
Well,
with it.
I can get you know what? Maybe you're winning me over now to talk about. I think the only context that I truly like olives is on a pizza, and I would never ask for it. It's just one of those things that I'm okay with if it's there.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Don't even like to go past them in the grocery store.
Yeah.
Something.
Well, this is good to know.
There you go. Yeah.
Appreciate you being so vulnerable with us here today. Well, Laura, I want to hear a little bit about your book in a minute, but I just want obviously we have listeners from very different backgrounds and places. Tell us a little bit about your story, especially as it pertains to how God has kind of worked in your life to really bring about your faith and how that's been a part of your journey.
Yeah. So, as you noted, I grew up here at Chapelgate and went to the academy here at Chapelgate Christian Academy, and went to Covenant College, played basketball. Kind of was my faith was very strong from a young age, and when I went to college, everything kind of like, oh, you're more independent, away from home, like. Really was just really challenged with a lot of things, especially at Covenant College, kind of a deep theologically based institution that really challenged some of my thoughts on really who God was at a deeper level that I really had never experienced before. But it was a great experience. I loved it, and went off to grad school and kind of shift worlds from kind of a Christian worldview to a public university at University of Alabama. And my faith was challenged there in a lot of ways. And I think I got a degree in child development and worked with children in hospitals after I graduated graduate school. And I think there was something about working with children with cancer that kind of shifted my thoughts on really who God was. And it's not at the time, but as I look back, there was a lot of, I was with kids when they died. I went into schools and talked about, hey, so-and-so's losing their hair. Or after a kid would die, I would go into schools and talk to the students. And I was around death a lot. And, as a 20-something-year-old, that was a lot to carry for about 3 years. And I don't know that I handled it very well. I thought I did at the time because I was a, new professional. I got this but as I look back now, it really kind of had this deep impact on me, and I wasn't sure where to place it. And so from there, as I note a lot in my book, kind of my story started to, not my story, but my life started to kind of unravel. Mm-hmm. I was living a life of deception and figuring out my own way because I don't think I could really deal with all that I was really dealing with. And then maybe some things, growing up where I wasn't sure where to place it. And then I'm trying to walk and have a relationship with God. And it was all just kind of coming to a head. And so I lived a life of deception for almost 3 or 4 years or really longer, of just really sitting in a lie and continuing to lie. And because once you lie, it just keeps going. Yeah. It just doesn't stop. And so because you either have to tell the truth or something else has to happen. And so I eventually got to the point where I was between a rock and a hard place. And I knew I would either tell the truth or I would have to end my life. It was kind of there.
Right.
And so by the grace of God, how it all played out is Chapelgate found out and my parents found out. And so Chapelgate Church and my parents were part of that grace for me and said, we want you to come home. You're coming home tomorrow. And I was all the way on the West Coast. So that was back in 2011 when I came back to Baltimore, and I restarted my life. I restarted my life. And I have a couple other things I can talk about in between when all of that started, when I came home, that were little signs of what God was doing and still speaking to me. But I notice it now, which is what I wrote in the book. Yeah. It was in a tornado in Tuscaloosa. So it was that event in of itself was something that really gave me a sign, gave me an inkling that God was really still after my heart.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, just hearing you talk about this now, that's one of the things that that's a beautiful, theologically rich story, because there's something in there that if we're not careful, and this is what you're piecing this together now, right? Mm-hmm. You're looking back and you're going, God was here, he was there at this moment, he was there at that moment. But oftentimes when we're in the middle of that, I had a prodigal period. It was a period of about 2 to 3 years where really I just said, I'm done with this, and I don't actually think this is real, or at the very least, it's stopping me from doing things that I want to do, and I don't want to live a lot, and I thought at that time that God was no longer with me, almost like an Old Testament, and then the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and it's but we know that's not true, and I think it's really encouraging even to hear you as you unpack some of that. Seeing God there in the tornado, he was there in that phone call, he was there at that moment, and God never left you, even though you were, in some sense, like you said, living that lie of the deceitfulness of double living. So just, thank you for sharing that. So I guess, fast forward a little bit. So you got back to Maryland, you said in 2011? Mm-hmm. Okay. And so
I think it was actually 2012 now that I'm thinking about
okay.
it. Yeah, because the tornado was 2011, so 2012.
So 2012.
Yeah.
And, kind of talk to us between 2012 and 2024, where we are today. What has God been doing in your life?
Yeah, so when I got back, I had to start over. I had lost my car in the tornado, so, I had to really start over. And so lived with mom and dad for I think close to 6 months, and just really sat with myself. And I remember Mike Rollo, who's a dear friend of ours, he kind of helped my family and I kind of walk through this, and he really challenged me and just said, I need you just to don't make amends. Just sit. This time's about you now, to really grapple with all that happened, and saw it was in counseling and all those things where I could really focus on me and not about trying to just make everything okay with all the people that I had hurt, including Chapelgate and the Academy and so many people in all different places. So I really had to sit in it, and that was challenging. But I started walking and running again because I was a big athlete. So running has always been my thing. So I started running again slowly and doing races and just really coming into really who I knew I was prior to, but who I knew I really was intended to be.
Well, I don't want to get us off topic
Sure.
here, but I think that's really interesting. Tell me, what did that feel like to come back to a place where you knew, like you were walking back to a place where you had done damage? What was that like?
Ooh, yeah, it was tough. And I remember thinking, I'm not going to Chapelgate. Like I can't do it. And I remember walking in, and there was a lot of people that still didn't know the truth. And so they would ask me different questions about my health and things, because I lied about my health for so long. And I'm like, I'm doing good. Yeah, I'm doing well. Because I didn't want to obviously lie to them, but I also didn't feel like it was meant for everybody to know.
That's true.
And so, I was really wanting to kind of like stand up in front of the church and say, I did this and look at me. And that was really about me trying to make it okay, not about really mending relationships. And so over time, probably over like a 2 or 3 year period, I worked on making those amends. I met with certain people. We did one-on-one, like, this is really me. And so the book, like, I guess 11, 12 years later, some people are kind of finding out through the book.
Yes.
So it's kind of this whole exposure for people that I didn't really have the communication with.
Yeah.
So it's been a beautiful thing to see folks read the book and say, thank you for sharing. Now I know the real you.
Yeah.
So it's been really cool. Yeah.
Yeah. I've been, as I've in my own faith journey and growing and, reading scripture, I feel like more and more what I'm coming across is that I have a propensity to read scripture behaviorally. To go, God wants me to behave a certain way, or scripture calls me to do certain things and avoid certain things. And that's true. But I think that the primary work of Christ is not behavior. It's true change. And true change only occurs when I'm honest with who I truly am at this moment. Like truly, authentically, brutally honest with who I am at this moment. And you used the word exposure. And I think it's an interesting word because that feels very, to me, I don't know about you, but that has almost like a negative, hurtful stigma with it. Like I got exposed. And I remember feeling that way going through the ordination process. In fact, I remember telling one of my friends, he said, why are you having so much trouble with this? Like taking these exams and going through the process of becoming a pastor. And I said, because I feel like it's focusing on the areas that I'm weak and ignoring all the areas I'm good at. And every time I go into that committee examination where there's 12 guys asking me questions, I feel exposed. Yeah. And that was a turning point for me because it actually invited me into, in some sense, a great work of the Holy Spirit is to expose the falseness that we hold on to as humans. As men and women, as brothers and sisters, and just feeling that like God's work of shining a light in those areas where I work so hard to keep hidden, even from myself.
Right.
And to see that was painful, I assume, for you. It maybe is painful for you. How do you reconcile that? Like, this is killing me, and yet life is there. Okay, tell us about that.
Yeah, I think what was important for me is to really, part of my healing was actually going back to work, because I got a job pretty soon. I don't even know. I think it was probably 3 or 4 months after I got back, and I was a child life specialist previously by trade, and through the tornado and my lifestyle and all those things, all that kind of went out the window. And so I had done my training at Hopkins. I had looked at jobs and going back into that field, and it just didn't play out. I lost my certification, so I'd have to going back to school a little bit, and it wasn't worth it for me. So I started looking at jobs working with kids in some way, because that was my degree. And I got a job doing shift work at a homeless shelter for families in Baltimore County, and started getting back and then hearing other people's stories. So I think getting in one way, kind of dealing with me, but then also walking with others, and not to cover up like me, but I got back into serving. And I think for me, that was just the start of me kind of getting back and hearing people's heart stories.
Yes. And that is so beautiful, because I know that for me and for you, and there's a lot of people out there who feel that their story is one of such damage or such sin or such secrecy or what have you, that they're no longer qualified to walk alongside and help others, right? And what I would say, and I think you would agree with me, is that is not the way we learned in Scripture. God is using Peter, who is on one moment a mountaintop of faith, and on the next moment a complete coward. He's using Paul, who at one moment was the most persecuting legalist the world has ever seen, becomes the most like humble and mission-oriented guy. I mean, God uses broken people. That's the only thing he has, right?
Yeah.
If he's going to use a human being, he's going to use a broken one, because that's the only kind there is. And we are broken people ministering, walking with, serving one another in the midst of our brokenness.
Yep.
And I'm grateful that God used this homeless shelter to even bring you out and say, no. It's not just, this is what you've done and I still love you. This is what you've done. I love you. And I have plans for you, Laura.
Yeah.
And that's really exciting. So you start working at this homeless shelter.
Yeah.
And, how long ago was that?
It was it must have been in 2012. I got home in October of 2012. And you know what? I think I started, it was late 2012. So it was right before Christmas time. Yeah, I did that. And I grew in that profession, in my profession, and became a volunteer coordinator, then became an assistant director of some housing programs. And then I spent about 9.5 years there, and ended as a program administrator over all the housing programs in Baltimore City that St. Vincent de Paul, who I worked for, ran. So I was there almost 9 years and grew into, I think, 6 or 7 different positions during my time there. So I really saw God really working in me and really challenging me in my leadership, and just really kind of mending me into who I am now and kind of my trajectory. Yeah.
So, and where are you now?
So I'm at Helping Up Mission. So Helping Up Mission is a organization that's been around for over 150 years, and we just opened a new building last year for women, to serve women and women with children now going through addiction. And so I started there in May of, I should have been probably 21.
So you've been there for a few years.
Yeah, a few years. Yeah. So I'm going into my third, it'll be 3 years in May.
Okay.
So yeah. So I'm the assistant director there. So I oversee all programs and operations. And it's just it's been such a gift. And I knew I still wanted to work with individuals or families in some way. And I knew God calling me there, just so that I could really work in a faith-based community, serving the community that I love, which is in Baltimore City. So I just have a real passion for walking alongside people and meeting people where they're at, and just like all of us. And so it really, sure, we serve others, but they serve us too. And it's remarkable.
Yeah, it is. It's like, it is more blessed to give than to receive. And we jump straight to money. And that is 100% a good application of that verse. But
Sure.
man,
Yeah.
giving my life away, giving my story away, giving my control away, giving my pride away, all these things. Like, yes, there's I receive way more. I heard a pastor one time say, people often think people in leadership positions in the church or in ministry are there because they're stronger. And the truth is, he said, I won't speak for everyone, but that's certainly not true for me.
Yeah.
I'm here because I don't have the strength to be anywhere else. And I thought that was
that.
so good.
I like
that idea of like, he has such a respect for, his brothers and sisters who are out working careers in business or finance or what have you, and going, man, like they have to have a faith out in the world. I can barely have a faith here surrounded by them. And I thought, man, that's truly beautiful. The picture of he's giving himself away, but it's in a place where he's getting so much. And that's really, really good. So tell me about your book a little bit. It's called Single-Handedly Blessed. So A, how'd you end up on the title? And B, what caused you to want to write a book?
Yeah, it's all great questions that I've been asked several times, and sometimes I'm like, I don't really know how it even came to be. So I'm not a writer. I write journals. I like to write in my journal personally, but I'm not a writer. But as I started working at Helping Up Mission, kind of that transition from my previous employer to Helping Up Mission, and being involved in the church, being single, wanting to adopt, or had already adopted a baby at that point, I just felt like there was more that I, as a single individual, that I wanted to share with the world or with whoever would read it about singleness. Singleness is not a death sentence, so to speak. It's not an end-all be-all. It's not your life is over or there's no opportunities, or because that's a lot what I tell myself and still do sometimes, to be honest. But I really wanted to share my story, number one, but also give hope to not only single individuals, but to have eyes open even to the church at large that single individuals exist, and that it's important to minister to that particular group, 100%, but also to talk about my adoption story. And so my goal was really to write it so that anyone, married, single, male, female, could read it and get something out of it. Because I didn't want to target just, if you're single, read this. I wanted to really use creative measures like music and scripture and other people's stories, which I did in chapter 6, and interviewing other people to share their story.
I think that's really interesting because I was waiting for you to bring up your daughter, and I love the way you do it because you say it so naturally. Oh yeah, I adopted a kid, but like that's not normative. I air quoted for those of you listening. That's not a normative thing to think of somebody who is single adopting a child, and I've always been so like just encouraged and blessed by that. In your life. And so tell me about, and we're going to get back to the book in a second, but tell me a little bit about that journey. Like, how did you begin to process that? Because I imagine that, I'm guessing there's not a whole lot of resources out there for single folks who are interested in adopting, So just where did that process even begin? Like, how did those thoughts start to arise? And how did you eventually get to the place where you're like, yeah, I feel God is calling me to do this?
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is I had a lot of friends actually going here to Chapelgate Christian Academy that were adopted. And so adoption's close to my heart. And throughout even my time where I was living my destructive life, so to speak, I dated, and I had a serious relationship at one point, and kind of came to a tragic end. And then when I came back, dating wasn't even anywhere in my purview. But then when I started to, in my 30s, probably like 31, started dating, and I had a lot of really good relationships. I would say a lot. I mean, a handful. And I had one relationship where I really thought it was going somewhere. Like I was pretty confident that we would probably get married, but it turned south pretty quick. One weekend it turned south, and I knew that it was a sign for me that it was over. And at that point I was like 34, and I had just kind of, after that relationship, I dated a little bit more, but I had just been really burned. And in doing so, I had kind of said to myself, if I'm 35, not in a relationship, then I think I'm going to pursue adoption. So my mom and I went, I'll never forget. So I adopted my daughter through Bethany Christian Services. And I asked my mom, can you just go to an orientation with me? So I go to orientation. I'm the only single person sitting there, the only person who brought their mom, right? And sitting there for this like 2-hour orientation. And my parents had actually pursued to adopt a baby through Bethany years and years ago when I was a young child. And so I got in the car, and I don't remember exactly what I said to her. She may remember, but I either thought it or I said it, that I'm going to do it.
Wow.
And I don't know what it was. I don't know. But I had grown up always wanting a children, but I always wanted to be married more than I did wanting to carry a baby. Mm-hmm. So carrying a baby for me wasn't something I grew up like, I can't wait to be pregnant and all that. I didn't kind of grow. That just wasn't part of my story or part of my, kind of my own thoughts, but I longed more to be married. So when I kind of knew that wasn't going to happen then I pursued it. So I applied, and I just said, you know what? I'm just going to wait and see what happens. So went through the process, and through the process, what's really great, Rob, is that through the adoption process, I had to be vulnerable. I had to be exposed, so to speak.
Right. Because
you have to write. They ask you questions from when you're a young child. The whole home study process is, tell me about this, tell me about that. And I had to tell my truth for the first time to a stranger, my social worker. And so I think that point in time really kind of started me on this book.
So there's almost a sense in which you took this step of faith, like I want to investigate adoption, and and as you're investigating this work, God is like, hey, as you're doing work for me, I'm going to do work on you. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. And then I was like, ooh, if I share this, am I not qualified to have a baby? Like it's all, I wasn't struggling to tell, but I was like, I have nothing to lose at this point. And if it's not meant to be, it's not meant to be.
Sure.
And so, but yeah, it was a really amazing process. So went through all of that, and then sat and waited for almost 2.5 years. And I was close to closing the book on it. I was close to saying, you know what? I'm not going to keep waiting. I was busy during my waiting. I was traveling and doing stuff and working, and I wasn't sitting home kind of like, okay, am I going to get a call? But I just was like, I'm not sure this is going to happen. And come to find out, a good friend who used to work in the counseling center at Chapelgate, she and I had dinner one night, and the next day she called me and she said, are you driving? And I'm like, yeah. She's like, call me when you get home. And I was like, okay. And so I get home and call her, and she said, you're not going to believe this. She said, I have an older lady living in my basement. And she said her granddaughter's looking for an adoption placement for her child. And I was like, oh. So fast forward, that baby is now my daughter. It's amazing.
That is amazing. And what a lovely daughter. She brightens my day every Sunday morning when I get to see her. Yeah. And she does that amazing for a lot of people too.
Yeah, she is. She's amazing.
Oh, man. So, oh my goodness, Laura. So, currently a mom, currently serving as the assistant director of Helping Out Mission, and currently
Yeah.
an author sharing the story of God's work. So, let's just maybe unpack the book a little bit.
Sure.
Because I love, you've been so good at telling like a little bit about the
Yeah.
book, but like not giving it away. And I
Sure.
love that. You're so good. Tell us, who would you really say like this book is for this person?
I don't think it has any bounds. I wouldn't say a particular people group or subset of folks. I really think it could be for anyone, because my goal is really to, again, speak into loneliness, speak into insecurity, speak into isolation, but then how God kind of meets you in those places. And that's why I really looped in music to it, because I love hymns, and that's what I focused on for the different chapters. There's a QR code with the song so that it kind of sets the stage for what I'm going to talk about. So it really is for anyone.
That's really cool. And so as you continue on your journey, where do you feel God is leading you as, as a woman, as a mother, as a believer? Where is God taking you now?
There's a couple things. I'm not sure if you knew this, but I'm in the process of adopting again. I thought you and I had a conversation with it. I couldn't remember. Right. So I've just gotten past my 1 year of waiting. And so, in that season of waiting to see what God does, Adeline's dying to be a sister.
Yeah.
So, kind of in that waiting journey. Also thinking about doing a different book as well, maybe a children's story. So working on some things. God has really used, what's interesting, God has really used people that I never thought he would use to connect with me because of this book. Like an illustrator, for example, that's my neighbor. And so it's really been amazing. So now she and I are working on a project together. Trying to.
That's really cool.
So it's really cool how God's doing that. So so those are the big things. Continuing to grow professionally and so those are probably the top three things.
Yeah, that's amazing. It really is. Adoption is something a lot of Christians consider at some point. Not every Christian, but we think about passages in James, true religion, visiting the widows and the orphans, and caring. And, we know that also as believers, we are adopted by God. We are now called his children. And what would you say maybe for someone who is in the process of wondering, could I really do that? Is that something I don't know. It's just, that seems really hard. Or I've heard some crazy stories and I just don't know. How would you, as someone who has made that sort of leap, how would you counsel, advise, encourage, or guide them?
Yeah, I always believe if you know in your heart that you want to pursue something, there should be nothing holding you back than it actually just not happening. So what I mean by that is, for me, I was thinking, how am I going to afford daycare? How am I going to pay for this adoption? How am I going to have a life outside of being home with my child? How am I going to maintain the house? How am I, all of these things kind of go through your head, single or not. But for me, thinking of all those things, I think it's community wrapping around you. And one thing I'd advise, and this is one reason why I almost didn't do it, don't not pursue adoption because of the money. Because I didn't get any grants. I mean, there's tons of grants out there, but it takes hours and hours to do applications and references and things. But for me, I did not want money to be a reason why I didn't do it. There's tax credits. There's all kinds of things. And adoption is a long process to where it's not, it's financially feasible because it stretches out over the entire duration of your adoption journey. So it's not like you apply to adopt and then you have a baby in 6 months. It's a long process. And so, and there's resources, and there's loans, there's different things. And so that for me was almost a no-brainer. I was like, there's no way. But God really provided that for me. And so, and again, I think it's asking those closest to you. I know I remember when I was in the decision-making process, obviously my parents, I talked to a whole lot about this. And I went to our pastor here at Chapelgate, met with him and his wife, and just said, this is what I'm thinking about pursuing. And what are your thoughts on that? We had a really great conversation, and they supported it and all of, so it helped me feel more confident. And knowing that those that are closest to me were supportive of me. So,
yeah, that's really great. I find that I'm someone who, and this is a strength at times, and in the right context, it's really beneficial. But I'm a forecaster. I can look into a situation and most of the time pretty well tell you here's what's going to be difficult about that. Here's what's going to be good about that. But then I kind of like will at times I'll almost experience the paralysis by analysis of that. And sometimes I wonder, I'm like, am I missing out on blessing because I am, I've decided, no, I can't do that, and so what I like about your story is you have in some sense taken a more faith-filled approach, which is to say, I don't know, but all I can do is I can either sit here in the I don't know, or I can take one more step toward it. I can sit here going, I don't know if I should write a book. I mean, would anybody even read that book? Am I a writer? No, I don't think I'm a writer. Should I write a book? It's like, well, you could either sit there in that same place, or you could just take the next step. Let me meet with somebody.
Yeah.
Or let me just start.
Sure.
Let me see if I can even come up with like a chapter heading for a couple chapters, Let me see if adoption is something that God might be calling me and leading me to.
Yeah. Let
me see what my close, counselors think. And here's what's interesting. In your case, the story works out with you eventually adopt, right? But there's also a sense in which because of the forgiveness of Christ, because of the freedom of the gospel, I actually can take a step in there and then realize, no, this isn't for me. And I don't need to hang my head at all. Right? Like, that's the beauty of it to me is I can take a couple steps and then realize, no, that God is not calling me to adopt or to, or to marry this person or to whatever it is. And I don't need to feel like I failed or because I am totally secure in the love of my Father. So I'm really encouraged by that. What would you say, kind of maybe wrapping up here for this conversation, what would you say to someone who, we kind of talked about adoption. What would you say to someone who's single and struggling to find their place or feel like they belong in the family of God?
It's a really interesting question because often I struggle there. I think there's something, for me, I think going back to kind of what I had to do when I first came back and started working at that homeless shelter, I started serving. And so for me, in my singleness, I have to, outside of my work and what I do, there's still a sense of I need to be involved. I need to serve. I need to be in a small group with all married folks. It's hard.
Yeah.
Or different ages, or, I hosted a small group for a while. So that was good for me because I'm inviting people into my world, right? In my home and things like that. And I think serving is at the crux of that. But the reality is the loneliness, the desire, all those things don't go away. And so it's hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard. I think out of, and I think for me and what I don't want other people to do, because I tend to do it, is say, because I failed all those years, that's why God's not rewarding me, air quotes, right? With a godly man. Because I messed up. I screwed up. But that's where these intentional pursuance of things, like with my daughter, was a clear sign that he has not thrown me away, right? So I think I have to have a hope that looking back at my failures and then looking at what God has done in between or after the failure to now, he can do the same thing in marriage. He can do the same thing. And so my hope is that I think serving is important. I think getting to know people in different, outside of your kind of normal go-tos, and really talking about the struggle. Having people you can talk to say, this is really sucks.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know what to do. I feel isolated. And I think having those people you can call when you get in those moments. So community and serving is huge. It's helped me. It doesn't solve it, but it helps. It
Lord,
really
that
helps.
is powerful. I mean, as you were talking, I just thought of two things. I thought one is like I'm not a big fan of snow. And this is going to seem like a random total side caveat, but here's why I don't like snow. Because snow's beautiful for one day and then it's ugly for 7.
Yeah.
In Maryland anyway.
Longer,
if you're up north, like maybe it's a totally different world. But for us, it's like we get a beautiful snow here in Maryland. It's gorgeous for a morning or an afternoon, and then it lingers for weeks and it's muddy and disgusting. And here's the reality. That's us. That's us as people. On one hand, I'm beautiful. On the other hand, I'm wretched, and I'm a both. I'm a both and. And as God's people, we need to continually be okay with the fact that we are that to one another. And then the next thing I was thinking about is just you're actually, your life is a picture of the gospel in that it's disruptive. It's engaging in areas that maybe are not normal to engage in. And that's exactly what Jesus does. I mean, you think about who he has dinner with, the way he talks to people and the way everybody else talked to that person. And I go, it's disruptive because the gospel enters into those places where we're afraid to go. And when the second you said, I looked for small groups with married people, I'm like, wow, that's so counterintuitive, right? We think, well, I got to find people who really understand me. And instead saying, that's helpful. And it is, right? It is helpful for me as a young father to find other young fathers to talk through what is it like. My goodness, this is a challenge.
Sure.
And yet it's also really good to find people who are not going through what I'm going through, because what I'll find is God is in their story just as much as he's in mine. And I can be encouraged and I can benefit from hearing that. So, I mean, you are a blessing, my friend.
Thank you.
And I'm so grateful for you. And I'm grateful for the way that God has built and designed you to be willing to just share his story of the work he's doing in your life. And I'm very excited for the prospect of a second child coming into this family. So Laura, just thank you for sharing. Thank you for being here. Do you have any other thoughts before we close out?
No, I think, I say no and then I keep talking.
Yeah, that's right.
I do. I think one thing I just want to leave with that I want to challenge folks that know me or don't know me, but mainly those that do, that my hope is that, or here's what I want to say. So once you come out of a disruptive lifestyle or a prodigal season, there are still things that there are things and issues that causes us to be destructive, and those don't go away just by changing atmosphere. It's a process of learning about you. What is the struggle? What caused me to do X? What's really going on inside my own heart? And so some of my, I just want to challenge people that know me to not give up on me.
Right.
Several have. Several have not wanted to be a part of my life anymore because of some things I still struggle with. And so I just, I long to not continue to go back to that place of guilt. And so I think I just want to, I'm so grateful for where I am, but I also don't want to be stuck in my past. And I still hurt people, right?
That's right.
And then lastly, something powerful about why Helping Up Mission is the place for me, just to end, is, and it goes along with what I'm talking about, is our senior director often says this when we're meeting with some of our clients in disciplinary issues or needing to discharge folks for various reasons. And she always says, "But for grace, there go I." That's
right.
And so we can easily find ourselves deep in a pit, and we all have at some point. And so I desire for people to give grace to people, because we're all hurt folks and in different ways. And so I long for authentic relationships and community. And I just wanted to leave with that.
I think it's a great place to end because again, we often can read scripture in a behavioral context and say, now that Laura has done her prodigal period, right? She'll never have another prodigal period. She'll not struggle with things like she did in her prodigal period. She won't be broken the way she was in her. In some ways that's true, but in some ways you're still dirty snow.
Yeah, that's it.
And to say, and yet, but for the grace of God, so go I. What that actually says is this, and it's a phrase that people can use very like quippy, but the truth is it's soaked in gospel truth, which says this. I go, left to my own devices, right? Here's another saying I love. Left to my own devices, in the right context, at the right place, in the right time, there's not a single sin I wouldn't commit.
That's right.
That's honest.
Yeah, that's it.
That's authentic. That's real. That's genuine.
Yeah.
And it's truth. So what that means is when I'm seeing fruit in my life, I cannot take credit. I go, God is good.
Yeah.
God is taking this wretched man and somehow using him for glory and for good. And God is taking this wretched woman and doing the same. And I go, we're beautiful and messy. And that's the church. That's the church. So Laura, thank you. I'm grateful for you. I'm going to put links in the show description to your book and also to the Helping Up Mission. If you guys want to learn more about Helping Up Mission, we're actually going to have Mike Rollo on in a couple weeks here to talk about Celebrate Recovery and the Helping Up Mission and how those two things really do a lot of overlap of gospel ministry. But, encourage you, check it out, see if God is leading you to support that ministry. It's a great ministry. It's done great work for the kingdom. And, we hope that you will join us again next week for another episode of In the Fire. Laura, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll hopefully chat with you again sometime soon.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
Take care, y'all.